All right, let's see if this works. Hang on.
What are you doing?
I'm making sure we can go onto YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Transition. Come on. There we go. Okay. Um. So what's this over here? It should not be there. All right. Oh, that might be something else. Okay. All right. So, does this shirt look okay?
Yeah, it looks fine.
Okay.
It looks good against the blue. Give me 1 second. I'm just grabbing lotion. Hang on.
All right. So, as far as conversation goes today, I have stuff up. Um, I figure what we can do is we're going to do a little chat on Biden picking Kamala Harris and how things have changed um, constitutionally and how we vote for people and has is the COVID era rather. Um, does this mean that the need for political conventions is pretty much over? The big galas at the hotels and things. And there's some interesting history behind it.
Okay, well, you're going to be the one primarily taking the lead on that because I've never been to a convention or really felt the need for a convention. You know, like my generation, I don't think really cares as much about conventions as older generations. So, I mean, we'll definitely have a good conversation about it, but you're going to have to be the one driving that part because I don't know much about that.
Yeah, yeah, I have no problem with that. Um,
Okay.
but so anyway, let me get this pulled up. USarchives.gov. I think that's a pretty reliable source.
I'd say so, but you never know these days.
Okay. Just so you know, we are out live on YouTube at this moment. So say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody.
You're getting the behind the scenes here as we're setting up our podcast for what's cooking today. And we'll be going, starting the podcast very shortly. If you're joining us live on YouTube, I'm Charles W. Kim, and this is Nicole M. Wells. She is up in the Garden State, New Jersey. I'm down in Orlando, Florida. And we are journalists, veteran journalists who've been covering various beats in various states for the last 30 years. Me, more so the 30 years than Nicole, who's kind of about 5 years in, maybe 6. But
Pardon. Excuse me. Pardon. 8.
8. Oh,
Thank you.
yeah, those 2 years are,
That's 3. Talk about math skills, my goodness.
Wait till you're over 20 years in the field, and 2 doesn't seem like all that much.
Well, that's when you're first starting out, sir, okay? So just get it right.
But our podcast is weekly. It's called What's Cooking. It's from the Grill Live. We have a live 365 radio station called The Grill, and you can find that online. Please feel free to listen to it. We'd love to have you. Lots of music, talk, and other stuff. And we cover a variety of topics. We had a soap opera actress, and we had political discussions. We had discussions about covering COVID-19. And other things coming up too. We're going to be doing some stuff on gaming coming up shortly because I happen to like the game. So we'll be doing some stuff on that should be interesting and entertaining. And that's really the whole point of this, is to entertain and inform. and Nicole and I will do our best to do that. Today we're going to be talking about, and you'll hear this again in the podcast in a few minutes, we're going to be talking about U.S. political conventions. Have they kind of gone the way of the dinosaur? Do we even need them nowadays? And also some different things about how voting for major federal offices has changed since the Constitution. So it'll be, I think, an interesting discussion, and maybe a bit of history. You'll learn something, which will be good. Remember, if you are new to our channel, smash the like button, subscribe.
Don't break your phone.
Yeah, but please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll know when we drop a new video. So with that said, I think we're going to be about ready to get going. You ready to go?
Sounds good to me.
And welcome to the Grill Live in our weekly podcast, What's Cooking, with journalists Charles W. Kim and Nicole M. Wells. I'm coming to you from the center of the Sunshine State in Orlando, Florida, and she is in central New Jersey, the Garden State. We're here to bring you a bunch of different perspectives. We're both veteran journalists with a lot of experience, and we won't say how many years for some of us. And we'll try to inform you and entertain you for the next hour or so. So feel free to join us on Anchor FM, where our podcast lives. You can also pick us up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Overcast, and many others. We have a Discord server that you can join called The Grill, and the link is right, if you go on our YouTube link, it's up there. You can also be able to join us through the Anchor site, and if you like our work and you like what we do, please consider supporting us. As little as 99 cents a month helps keep us going, especially in this time of COVID. We're both unemployed journalists, so we can definitely use some assistance here and there. 99 cents a month, $4.99 a month, whatever you can do to help us feel like our work. How's it going, Nicole?
It's going okay. Skies are looking pretty overcast now, so we're about to get, hammered by some severe thunderstorms, I'm told. So it's just, one thing after another weather-wise up here.
Well, I'll tell you, and we usually start the show talking about the weather, and it's ironic because since I just recently moved to Florida, since the coronavirus and all that, and being unemployed up in Jersey. And the funny thing is, since I came down here, Jersey has gotten worse tropical weather and worse heat than we've had here in Florida. And that's I find quite amusing.
For you, it's just not fair. Because Florida's used to this kind of crap. This is not Jersey. So you can take it back. Our trial period has expired.
And you have another tropical storm kind of heading into the area. And the way the early maps look, it may even totally miss Florida and just kind of head up north. So.
Oh, okay. Well, listen. Like I said, I'm done.
It's already making that turn. Where it's just going to go right by the coast of Florida and head right up to the Carolinas and right up your way. Because you need, by the way, are there still folks without power up there, or how is that situation going when that storm hit you last week?
So it was slow, the recovery in terms of power. Everywhere you went, you heard people bitching that they didn't have power. Because it was a quick storm, thankfully. It came in, did its thing, and left rather quickly. It wasn't stalling and causing more damage. So it did what it needed to and got out. But the number of trees and power lines it brought down was crazy. So yeah, some people didn't get power back until yesterday. So, and I was a week out. So it was intense in terms of people not having power. And not so much here in central Jersey, but more in North Jersey. At least, my experience in North Jersey, particularly the northwest corner of the state, where they rely on wells a lot of the time for water. I mean, if you don't have power, you don't have a well pump working, and you don't have water. So,
Right.
in addition to power being out, you don't have water. So it's kind of like insult to injury. So yeah, I mean, it was rough for a little while there for some people.
Okay. Well, I think it's time we dive into our topic today. As you may or may not know, yesterday, which was, I believe, August 10th, no,
11.
11th yesterday, August 11th, in the afternoon, Democratic presidential nominee, or presumptive nominee, Joe Biden, former Vice President Joe Biden, picked Kamala Harris from the West Coast, Senator Kamala Harris, as his running mate on the Democratic ticket. So now the rosters are set, so to speak, for the general election. It'll be President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence against former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Kamala Harris. Now, what's interesting is Vice President Biden said that he was going to pick a woman of color to fill the vice presidency. What I find interesting about that is for a number of years, whenever they've had a Supreme Court nomination or whatever to consider, the Democrats in Congress have been very, very sharp to point out, oh, well, if you're Republicans, you have litmus tests that you give judges. So if a judge is not going to vote, say, a certain way on abortion, you're not going to put him on the court, no matter how qualified he is. Well, it's interesting because now it appears that Vice President Biden and the presumptive Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, had a litmus test to pick his vice president rather than maybe the person who could do the job the best. And he picked someone who, during the primary race, when because Harris did run for president before suspending her campaign, she took Biden to task several times during the debates. So some folks have said, and the media have said, it's surprising almost that he picked her, because she did take him to task quite publicly during the debates, bringing up his record of opposing busing during the 1970s. Now, of course, as someone who actually, she said she was one of the young California girls who was initially bused during that program where they took kids of color out of inner cities and purposely drove them, sometimes as much as 30 or 40 miles away from their neighborhoods, to be put in what they felt were better Caucasian schools. And that was supposed to kind of even the playing field in the education system. But everybody who was a part of that, both Caucasians and African Americans, did not like that idea. They didn't, folks did not like their kids being on buses for, 40 minutes to an hour, taking them to a school that was totally away from their neighborhoods, just in this effort to try to balance the racial diversity in the different schools. The program, for all intents and purposes, historically did not work, and it eventually ended. And that's where we are now. So that's who Joe Biden picked. Any thoughts, Nicole, on his selection?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's kind of a shame that Joe Biden picked, based on, the criteria of that she's a woman, so he ticked off that box, and that she's a person of color. Those are the only reasons, that I feel that he picked her, because he had to appease, the fringe groups of the Democrat Party that believe that, identity politics is the only thing that matters anymore. It's not a meritocracy so much as it's, how can we slice you and dice you up into these little slivers, these little groups, of the population, and determine, what little box to put you in. So for me, it's kind of like I really couldn't see him picking anyone else because that's who the party is. And as the party's presumptive nominee, of course he's going to do that. He would be crazy not to do that because then you'd hear all this, this crying, wailing, hand wringing, gnashing of teeth from, the fringe groups within the party, which, arguably can be said are taking over the party. And so you just hear all this complaint from those groups saying, oh, you had this chance, you had this opportunity, and you didn't pick a woman, you didn't pick a person of color. And it's not about, or let me say, it should not be about, what gender someone is or what their skin color is. It should be about the person best suited for the job, the person who actually can do the job, who has the life experience, the criteria in their background to do the job. So for me, it was just kind of, okay, yeah, it was a big yawn, essentially. Like, I didn't expect him to do anything different, but at the same time, it was still kind of like, yeah, okay. I mean, kind of pathetic, in my opinion, that's the only reason you picked her. And the fact that, when he bows out, which I fully expect him to, and I think anyone who actually has been noticing his decline in the public eye for the last, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, something like that. He's just been steadily going downhill. I mean, he can't even put a sentence together at this point. It's really sad. I mean, people joke about it, they mock him, but it is really sad. I mean, if I were in that position, I would not want my family propping me up, as the candidate when I can't even put a sentence together. So when I see him bow out, as I fully expect him to, she is what we would be getting as the president, and that's right.
How dare you?
Okay, Greta.
How dare you?
So yeah, I mean, I fully expect she is basically, for all intents and purposes, she's not the VP nominee. She's the president nominee for the Democratic ticket, and that is alarming.
Do you think that once they do have their quote convention, and we'll get to that in a little bit because that's going to be the main focus, but do you think when they actually have their convention, that they're going to keep Biden in, or do you think they're going to try to swap him out?
See, I don't know about that. I mean, like, we were going to say in a little bit, I mean, the convention is kind of up in the air right now. I mean, everything about it is a hot mess because of this, pandemic situation. So I don't know, because I think it depends a lot on, what happens with the convention. And I think also it depends a lot on, how he's doing at that point. I mean, if it's to the point where he can't really function in public, then yeah, I mean, at that point you can't really pretend anymore, and you're gonna have to scream out.
Interesting factoid. And I've been around 57 years, so I go back to watching conventions back to 68. And let me tell you something. It used to be, up until like the 1980s, even going to the Republican convention of 1980, when you had a power struggle between Ronald Reagan, I believe, and was it Pat Buchanan or someone else who ran? But you also had one in the Democratic side with Ted Kennedy, the third Kennedy brother, mounting a challenge to Jimmy Carter. Carter eventually came out on top, but it used to be that these big decisions were not necessarily made by primary voting. And what happened was, and we're going to get into this, is that much like the Electoral College for president, what happens is when you elect and you pull the lever down in the poll for a Trump or a Biden or whoever, you're actually paying for, or you're actually voting for, delegates to the convention, kind of like electors who must vote a certain way. So basically, those electors must vote for either the Democratic person or the Republican person. But once they get in the convention, those delegates, when they get together, like 25,000 of them, in these hotels for the convention during the week, there's horse trading that goes on back and forth. And the people who are the biggest vote getters in the primaries could potentially not get the nomination. They could be swapped out on the second, first ballot, second ballot, or whatever. And for years, if you go through the 50s and 60s and you look at the history of the conventions, there were these internal struggles within each party that where votes had to be taken, ballots had to be taken among the delegates to determine who the eventual nominee was. And in a lot of cases, the vice presidential pick was someone who came in close second or third in that initial balloting for the nominee. So conventions have changed. During the 1980s, this all kind of changed to these big shows where the outcome was already decided before the ballots were taken. That's why you hear something like Joe Biden. He has the number of delegates, and this is why it's important, because if you get so many delegates that are supposed to vote for you, then you are the presumptive nominee, that you've won that party's primary, and that's the way it is kind of played out now. But now this year with COVID, both parties are having these, quote, virtual, unquote, conventions, basically. Apparently there will still be some stuff going on in Jacksonville, Florida for the Republicans. The Democrats, their entire convention is going to be virtual. And probably for the first time in American history, both candidates for the Republican nomination, Donald Trump and Joe Biden for the Democrats, will be giving their acceptance speeches virtually, not appearing physically at a convention space, accepting the nomination of the party. So that's something unique, and that brings us to the point, which is, are the conventions even needed anymore? If we're actually doing it with the votes, and that's who picks the nominee, and then the nominee, instead of horse trading at the convention with the people running against him so much, he gets to totally vet and vet and pick his vice presidential running mate on his own for whatever reasons he or she deems fit. Have we gotten away from the need to have these conventions, which are basically propaganda pieces for the Republicans or for the Democrats?
I think yes and no. I think, like you said, the purpose mainly now is to put on a show. So, in terms of energizing your bases for both parties, I think it is good to have them, because it is a show. You amp up your support, and you get people excited, and that seems to be the purpose of them at this point in time. But in terms of, like you were saying, like horse trading and figuring out who actually is going to be the nominee at this point, that's kind of, we're past that. And, it doesn't so much matter if all of that's done prior to the convention. So for, as an older millennial who is not really, an actual millennial, in terms of fitting in with that cohort, for my generation, it doesn't really seem to serve a purpose apart from, like I said, ginning up support, and getting the excitement flowing, among the base.
Well, the thing is, I would say to that is that your generation and the generations after you, and maybe even the generation before, really never saw what happens at a real contested convention, what they call now a brokered convention, and why that's like, oh, there's going to be a brokered convention. That basically means the party bosses all get together in a room with the candidates, and they do some horse trading on policy positions and things, and then they actually come to some kind of decision. Whereas now it's all out in the public, which some people say is better for a democracy, and others say not so much. that is kind of a sham. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is.
I mean, I don't have the answer to that either. But like I said, I think I think it's kind of morphed into a big cheerleading kind of thing for your person that's already been decided before you get there. So in that sense, I think it is helpful, in terms of putting on a show for people and getting that support going. So.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at what the Constitution, which, obviously goes back 240 years. When they formed the government, they did it. They had the House of Representatives, which is represented by the population of the districts within the state. And they have the Senate, which each state has 2 representatives. But back in the day, when the Constitution was formed, voters picked their congressman at large through an at-large vote. The senators were chosen by the individual state legislatures. And there was a senior and a junior senator. Now, senators are elected at large by the population. Now, some folks say, oh, that's so much better. They have to run for office instead of just being, political hacks who are appointed. But then again, if you look at it kind of in the vein of the Electoral College, which everybody now wants to change, the state should have the ability to send folks to Washington that the state legislatures feel have their state's best interests at heart. And that was the whole. There was also, obviously in the 1700s, education was not what it is today.
Well, actually, we can argue that. Education today, I think, is on a downward spiral. But go ahead.
To the point where there were many people in the fledgling nation that could not read or write, that probably could not serve as a United States senator, circa 1803. And, much like the electors for president, the whole point is that you needed folks who were literate and could write and things to be able to fill these positions. And that's why it was given as a duty and responsibility of the state legislature to appoint someone or pick someone to be a senator for their state that was, had certain criteria that could be met to do the job. Now anybody can run for senator and win, and that all doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, I think it's kind of like you were saying about the conventions. The way it's done has kind of morphed, from how we started out to where we are, and I think part of that is a result of, like you were saying, a more, educated population, allegedly. Because yes, if you have a large percentage of your population that can't read or write, yeah, you probably want to be, doing your selection process a little bit differently than if the majority of your population can read and write. So I think probably that's why, the process changed. I don't necessarily agree that it is a good thing. If you look at what passes for government in New Jersey, right now it's just one giant disgrace in terms of single party rule. So I kind of like the idea of direct election by the people rather than being appointed by the state legislature, because the state legislature right now in Trenton is an absolute disgrace. Every one of them needs to be tarred and feathered and thrown out of office. So yeah, I saw this great meme the other day, and it said, politicians have not been tarred and feathered in quite some time, and it shows. And it definitely shows here in New Jersey. So I'd much rather, the people of the state, select our senators than the legislature, because we might, maybe, possibly, if the people in the state wake up, have a better chance of putting in someone, that...
Right, but then you're also making the argument that we should get rid of the Electoral College, and whoever wins presidency should be popular vote. Because the whole concept is the same on both areas. And
I'm not making. Go ahead.
if you're saying the people should elect their legislators, or their senators, excuse me,
Thank you.
instead of having the legislator pick them based on the state's needs that the majority of the state legislature feels are based on the state needs, then you can make the same exact argument for getting rid of the electoral college, which would give urban population centers a much greater say in presidential politics than the individual
Yeah,
states.
yeah, I don't see it the same way at all. Like I see it
Well,
as
tell me how the argument's different.
if you let me finish before you jump in, sir. You good?
Oh, I'm great.
Oh, fabulous. I'm so glad to hear it. Okay, so no, I see it as being different because the whole point of the Electoral College, like you said, is to ensure that the dense urban population centers are not the ones determining the outcome of the election and, trampling on the little people out in, supposed flyover country. So that's the point of the Electoral College. And that I see as being different because it's a numbers game there. Whereas with your senators, the number is always predetermined at two. You're not changing and quite honestly, you're not changing much anyway. I mean, if you look at Jersey, Jersey is a deep blue state. I mean, there are some ruby red areas of the state, don't get me wrong. And who knows? I mean, in this election, you might see Jersey as being more purple than blue. But you're not changing the numbers specifically. You're still electing two senators. And it's not it's not the same in that sense. But also, I think that, like I was saying, I think that in Jersey, the outcome is not going to change per se, because more than likely, you're still going to end up with the same people, the same Democrats in Jersey's case, that would have been, appointed by the legislature had they been the ones to do it. So I don't really see it as being the same.
Well, initially, these positions were all picked by caucuses, which are gatherings of basically the party bosses and things.
The party faithful?
No, not the faithful, but
No.
the
Well,
activists within the
isn't
parties.
isn't that what they do in Iowa though? The Iowa caucuses?
Well, Iowa caucuses involve regular people,
Well, that's what I said.
but
Party faithful.
in the terms of if you look at the history of picking senators and things like that, it was party bosses,
Okay.
the top management of the parties that would get together in smoke-filled rooms and make these decisions. And a lot of what has been amended in the Constitution, according to the amendments themselves, was to get rid of this, to change this, to make it more open, make it more transparent, and not smoke-filled room decisions. To make it more democratic. But when you look at it, it's the same argument for getting rid of the electoral college. That if we really want to be transparent and open and voting, that whoever wins the popular vote should be president. If you have any other arrangement other than that, then it's open to corruption and things. I think what people don't understand about the electoral college is it's based on 51 separate elections. And whoever the winner of each of those 51 elections in that state, that's who the state gives their electoral votes to. And the electoral votes are based on the number of senators and congressmen of the state and can change with the census.
I think that this year's election is going to be kind of a hot disaster anyway. I wouldn't even say a hot mess. I would just say a hot disaster. Because you have so many of these governors in these states that are, I mean, like here in Jersey, the primary was a disaster. I mean, it was a disaster. It was all vote by mail, and that just is not going to work. I mean, I think you are going to have a real problem if these governors in these states that, are basically trampling on the Constitution, shredding it, and with it people's rights, if they decree from their thrones and their capitals that it has to all be vote by mail, I think you're going to have a real problem. Because it's just not going to work. I mean, if we can stand in line, and I mean, I'm sure you've seen this, it's been all over the internet. If you can stand in line at Target and Walmart and Trader Joe's and Home Depot to get whatever the crap is you need to get, you can stand in line to vote on November 3rd.
But don't you know when you go stand in line to vote, you're going to get the COVID, but if you go to Trader Joe's, you're not.
Well, that's because the COVID, I like the in front of it.
The COVID.
Yeah. So that's because the COVID, didn't you know, is a very intelligent little virus, and it's much smarter than anything that has come before.
Right now, I just read something today about all they're making a point in New Jersey media about the number of parties and things that have been broken up, and Governor Phil Murphy has been calling them knuckleheads and all this, and then, a party of 700, a party of 400, and there's a party that led to in Long Beach Island that allegedly led to 39 lifeguards or 35 lifeguards coming down with COVID or testing positive with COVID. But again, nothing but the protests and everything that happened out in the street and people wandering around close to each other without masks. Not one case of COVID came from that.
No, of course not, because didn't you know that's a noble cause? I mean, people actually exercising their rights of free movement and deciding what to do with their lives, like to go to the party or to not go to the party, that can't be allowed to stand because, that's not a noble activity. But protesting...
Church can kill you, but protesting won't. And rioting won't. That won't. Well, at least not with COVID. I mean, if somebody beat you over the head with a baseball bat, yeah, that can kill you. Yes. So we want to be precise in our language.
I don't really feel the need to be, but you can if you'd like to. Obviously, if you were not listening, we were talking about COVID. But, so, no, it's just absolutely absurd. And, what's happening in Jersey, like I was saying before, I alluded to it earlier, with the one-party rule in Trenton is a travesty. It's just an absolute travesty. We were just handed a ridiculous decision today by the state Supreme Court about Phil Murphy's borrowing scheme that's unconstitutional, but, we're just going to let that one go. It's fine. Just go ahead. And so, I mean, you're kind of screwed any way you slice it here because you have, we're outnumbered in terms of sane, rational people in the legislature, in the governor's office, and apparently in the Supreme Court. So, it's kind of a disaster in terms of that.
Okay, we are going to break away for a message from our sponsor for a moment, and on the other side, we will be back with our discussion with Charles W. Kim and Nicole M. Wells. So just hang tight for a second.
Music, talk, news, sports, and much more. The Grill Online Radio, a Charcoal Media station. Music, talk, news, sports, and much more. The Grill Online Radio, a Charcoal Media station.
And yes, it is political convention time in the U.S. And will those conventions actually come off with the COVID virus competing for attention here in the nation? We have President Donald Trump, former Vice President Joe Biden, Vice President Mike Pence, and Senator Kamala Harris vying for those two choice roles in this election cycle coming up November 3rd. Make sure you get out and vote. And we are back here at the Grill, What's Cooking, which is our weekly podcast with journalists Charles W. Kim and Nicole M. Wells. and we're discussing the whether the political conventions of our life have kind of gone the way of the dinosaur. They even need it anymore. I mean, technology certainly exists, as we're seeing with Vice President Biden's campaign as a presumptive nominee. He has not officially gotten the nomination yet, by the way, for those who are keeping track. That happens at the convention, and theoretically, neither has President Trump. So, I mean, until those pieces of paper are signed off on and written off in stone, these are the presumptive nominees for both parties, and not necessarily who you might end up seeing in the election. At least that's the way it used to be. That used to be a question mark when parties actually had working conventions that delegates went to, and they argued the platform of each party and what issues and policies they were going to espouse, and you know, the candidates, and there was a lot of horse trading and stuff. Not so much anymore. And the question is now with Zoom, like we're using for this podcast, and other technological advances, do we even, and we have the votes, the national votes in each state for the primaries, do we even need these archaic entities of political party conventions, or are they nothing but a week of propaganda?
Well, like I was saying before, I mean, I think that in a sense they are needed, and in a sense they aren't. You know, in the sense of having to, you know, argue the platform and to actually determine, you know, who's going to be the candidate. I don't think they're needed for that, but I do think they are needed for, you know, drumming up excitement for the party's chosen candidate, you know, for getting that infectious, you know, excitement going for this race. So in that sense, I do think they are needed. You know, I'm sure I've never been to one myself, but, you know, I'm sure they're a lot of fun for those who have been. And they do serve that purpose of getting that excitement going, you know, to get their candidate elected.
But again, they were gatherings kind of another time. I mean, my parents used to go to various conventions every year from their various social groups, they were fraternal organizations they were part of. And I remember going to those, and one of the organizations, one of the chapters would have a hospitality room with lots of liquor and food. At night, you know, after the convention did its business, during the day, it was kind of a party atmosphere, and everybody was enjoying themselves. And I'm sure political conventions have elements of that just as much. But our society has changed so much since those days. You know, I mean, do we really need all that? Do we really have to send these party mucky-mucks, activists, you know, the party movers and shakers to these hotels for a week to figure out who's going to be, you know, the party's choice for whatever office?
Yeah, I just said I think so. You know, I completely agree that I mean, for me, I think that this convention cycle, I think it's going to be a huge letdown for a lot of people, because I think people look forward to these kinds of things. You know, for them, it's a thing you put on your calendar, and it's something that you go to and you're excited about. You know, and you look forward to it, and I think this go round is going to be really kind of a huge letdown for people, and hopefully, you know, that, you know, for these party operatives, hopefully that will not translate into, you know, reduced excitement for their candidate, because you know, nationally among voters, you know, hopefully they're still able to get out there and get people excited, because I think a lot of the momentum and the excitement begins at these conventions, and then, you know, it spreads throughout the party base that way. But go ahead, what were you saying?
Well, polling and different news stories have said that the enthusiasm for Vice President Biden among the party base of the Democratic Party is really not there. It's like 25%, which is super low. on the other side, even though they really haven't measured it adequately in the same way, and then obviously it's because President Trump is running for re-election and Biden is a challenger, so there has to be probably more excitement for a challenger when the incumbent has the advantage of the office and usually wins. But President Trump, considering he was unopposed for the Republican primary, I mean, there might have been a couple really, really lesser-known candidates in there that may have gotten like 0.5% of the vote or something, but President Trump was pretty much, the only game in town for the Republicans. Even so, people coming out during the primaries to vote for him nationwide, he set records in many of the states where they held the primaries for the number of people voting for an incumbent Republican. Or actually, an incumbent president of any kind. His numbers were better than Obama, better than Bush, better than Clinton when they all ran for re-election. So I mean, he beat them by a lot, by hundreds of thousands of votes, and no one had to vote for Trump because he was going to be the nominee pretty much in any case. But more of them came out in support for Biden during the Democratic primaries.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Trump is kind of, the asterisk. He's the exception to the rule and not the rule itself. I think with those other past presidents you mentioned, I think that, they were kind of, the same old. They were the status quo. They had long storied careers in law or, whatever in some field that, was appropriately, presidential enough. They were polished and groomed and, everything was exactly as it was supposed to be for what people would expect from a presidential candidate or a president if they were running for re-election. With Trump, I think it's very different because, he's not presidential in the sense that people are expecting him to be. He's brash, he's crass, he says what's on his mind, he doesn't care, basically. It doesn't matter to him. Like, if you don't like what he has to say, whatever, he's cool with that. But so he's a completely different animal in that sense. So I think that's why people are much more excited, and that's why they came out to vote in the primary for him, because they're excited about him, because he's something so completely different from what people are used to and what people expect. It's kind of like a breath of fresh air for a lot of people, because he's completely different. I don't think you can really go by Trump because he's the asterisk.
He's an enigma for sure. And there was another article today that appeared. I forget what the publication was, but basically it was a column warning Democrats to beware of the silent Trump voters. That unlike 2016 even, that Trump voters this time, because of the climate in the country and how people have reacted to Trump since he became president and the names they've called him, and even by extension, his supporters as racist, xenophobe, misogynist, you name it, fascist, Hitler, evil incarnate, the devil, that people, unlike 2016, are not as wanting to say in the polls that they support President Trump. They're going to vote for him, but they're not. When the pollers call, they'll say, "Oh yeah, well I'm not decided, or I haven't made up my mind yet." But they have. But they don't want. One of the comments, the writer of the column said, last name of the column, I don't know his first name last name was Curl, and he's got his bona fides in journalism and in covering things. And he said, in 2016, everywhere you looked in Middle America, you saw the Trump signs in the lawns and things. Not so much this time around, but he doesn't equate that with a drop off in support for the president, but rather the fact that people who did do that in 2016 had signs ripped off their lawn. They had their properties vandalized. And the general outrage of the left against Trump is causing people now who will vote for him to say, hey, I don't know who I'm going to vote for. But there's still the, quote, silent majority, and they are still there. And come election day, even though Biden's up by like double digits in many of the swing states due to recent polling, some polling organization, Monmouth University being one of them, is cautioning, Democrats, don't get so cocky. Because if there is this silent majority out there for Trump, that he may come back and win huge. And then everybody's going to be scratching their heads again. Well, when Biden looked like he was going to win, and, we don't understand. Nicole and Nicole will remember this. And I wonder, I'm pretty sure you do. We went to the Eagleton Institute at Rutgers.
Yes.
For a discussion. This was in 2016, before the election. Do you remember what month that was? I mean, it was fall because it was cold and rainy. I remember that. Cold night and rainy.
It might have been November or October, November.
It had to be October because it was before the election.
So it must have been
mid to late October.
Yeah.
And we went to this thing, and the Eagleton Institute had a panel, and they were talking during this forum, and we were covering it as journalists, and their big thing was how accurate the polls were in 2016, and these polls that showed Hillary Clinton 98% chance she was going to win. And the question I had is, I'm watching television and like everybody else in the country, and I'm seeing a rally for Trump with 20 or 30,000 people at it, and then I'm seeing Hillary's rally that maybe has 1,000 or 2,000 people. And I'm like, we're seeing all these Trump rallies with so many people. Just looking at that, any person with common sense would say, you're dismissing Trump. I wouldn't be dismissing him because look at all these people that show up for him as compared to his opponent. Well, so during the forum, they were opining in a very smug, I might say, which is definitely editorializing, but I can say that. I do have a recording someplace of that forum that if I can find it, I'll be very happy to play the audio for all of you. You can hear their smugness and their insistence that their polls are so accurate and it's so well done. And of course, Hillary's going to win this election. Trump doesn't have a chance. Silly people. And so I went up afterward with Nicole. We both walked up afterward. And I directly asked these Eagleton intellectuals, academics, well, I'm seeing all these people show up to the Trump rallies, and I'm not seeing that enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton. Don't you think that means something in terms of compared to what you're coming up with at the polls? And Nicole can tell you, they literally laughed at me.
No, they did. Yep, they did. But and that actually is a perfect segue into what I was going to say is that you can't trust the polls. You can't go by the polls because the polls lie. The polls are only as good as the data they're getting. And like you were saying, there are so many people out there who are afraid to say that they are a Trump supporter. They're afraid to put a sign on their lawn. They're afraid to put a flag on their house. They're afraid to put a bumper sticker on their car because they're afraid some crazy person is going to vandalize their property, either to steal the flag or steal the sign, burn it, key their car, smash.
Or in the case of wearing the Trump hat, beat them up, physically assault them.
Oh yeah, I hadn't gotten to that yet, but yeah, absolutely. If you wear a hat or a shirt or whatever, somebody's going to physically assault you and think that's okay because that's where we are in society right now. We're at that low point of people think it's okay simply because you disagree to vandalize someone's property or physically assault them. And that's where we are. And that should shame every single parent in the last, 40 years that we're here. How did we get here? how did these generations of kids grow up to believe that this is okay? So I think that you're right, that there are way more Trump supporters out there than anyone is willing to physically speak or put into writing, because it's frightening to some people. Especially because of how well the economy was going and how pro-life Trump was, appearing at the last March for Life. I think that he's definitely built up that base of support even bigger than it was in 2016, because he's got more of the pro-life support now, and he's got more of the people for whom the economy is the main issue. And I don't think people really see that putting Biden in that position could rebuild the economy the way Trump did it the first time. And I think a lot of people are saying, well, if he did it the first time, he can do it again. So why would we change horses when we already know this one did it once? He can do it again.
Right, and
So,
I've heard that argument too. But who knows? I mean, we both may be sitting here and be very wrong.
we may absolutely be.
Biden may win in a landslide for all we know.
We may absolutely be, but I don't think so, because I don't see enthusiasm for Biden.
Well,
the
other thing too is a lot of people take their opinions from social media, and now you have to ask yourself a question, especially on Twitter.
Yes.
You have to ask yourself: is who is going to speak out? It's usually, it's not the customer, for instance, who goes into a restaurant, is treated well, gets their meal out on time, it's cooked perfect, they really enjoy the taste, it's really good atmosphere, they have a couple glasses of wine, everything's nice, they have a wonderful night, they leave a generous tip, and they walk out the door. Now, they may say to somebody, one of their friends are passing, oh, you should try this place, it's amazing, or whatever. But it's the person who goes in, service is slow, the meat comes out uncooked, they screw up the drink order, they spill ice cream on your kid. Those are the ones who are going to jump on social media or jump on a public forum. You should never go here. It's horrible. It's bad. I think there's a lot of that dynamic playing out in our politics right now on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms, is that the people you're hearing the most from are those who feel the most angry and dispossessed and all that. And of course, the entire left politically have been this angry mob since November of 2016 when Trump won, because they didn't expect it. It was a gut punch to the Democrats that they didn't expect. They still have not come to terms with their own culpability in it. They're still blaming it on Russia, who spent, a few $1 million on a couple Facebook ads, that changed an entire electorate in America. You're right. They blame it on all kinds. The country, the entire country, by the way, and this would include those of you out there who are Democrats. You're all misogynists because you wouldn't elect Hillary. If you did not vote for Hillary, if you stayed home, or if you did not vote for Hillary, you're a misogynist. You hate women. You beat your wife or your significant other. Whatever.
However you go.
But I think that outrage that we're seeing is from a chorus of the most motivated people to be angry and outspoken. It does not necessarily speak for the majority of the country that are going about their lives, working, in this case, staying home, safe from COVID, or whatever. It doesn't really speak to their feelings, political leanings, and how they see our country going. And I think that's going to play a major part in this election. And what's going to happen, I think, again, is I think that come November, should Trump win, I think you're going to have the left totally scratching their head saying, well, we don't understand. Biden was a ticket back to normalcy, quote unquote. Back to the Obama years when, of course, no drama, scandal-free Obama, who deported more people than Trump has in his first term, who killed with drones more American citizens than any president in history. Who, I mean, we
The
can
list
talk.
goes on.
We can talk about how truly, Fast and Furious, where the DOJ it was involved in gun running to Mexican drug cartels to try to do an arms bust that went south. The cartels got the actual weapons and ended up using them to kill some American Border Patrol agents.
That was
Yeah.
a smart idea.
Benghazi. But, of course, nothing to see here. There was no drama or controversy. No, we'd rather spend our time impeaching a president for a phone call to his Russian or to his Ukrainian counterpart. That was beyond the pale, but, 3 people dead in Benghazi, including a U.S. ambassador, that's fine. Running illegal weapons to drug cartels in Mexico, that's fine. No scandal there. Anyway, I mean, this is all documented, folks. It's not conspiracy theory. There is evidence for all these things.
I think that this election for a lot of people is going to be a historic one, whether you're on the right or you're on the left. I think that both sides, when I forget who it was, but I heard some commentator say it the other day that not since the 1860 election has there been such a charged election cycle in terms of how people see it, in terms of how dire the straits are. It is a very apocalyptic almost election for people, because both sides see it as my side has to win or life as we know it is not going to continue.
That's actually a point.
And I think that
that's actually a point I wanted to get to. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that the left sees it as, we have to correct and right the wrong of 2016. The right sees it as, it's Trump or socialism. It's America versus socialism. And those are the lenses through which people are seeing this election. It is a very charged election for both sides. So I think it's going to be a really heated November 3rd, for sure.
And if we with universal mail-in voting, the results, unlike past elections, results are probably not going to be known for several months.
Yeah, and that's a problem.
That is a big problem because in December, according to the Constitution, the Electoral College has to make, has to meet and come up with a decision and has to certify basically how the people voted. So now, whether that's going to happen or not, I don't know.
Well, I mean, like we were saying before, I mean, if people can stand in line at insert names of stores here, they can stand their asses in line to vote for X candidate. I mean, it's that simple. It's a very simple thing.
Well,
so I don't
and also,
see what the problem.
in the early days of the Constitution had it where basically the president is the person who got the most elector votes.
Yeah.
And then the vice president would be basically the first runner-up.
Yeah.
What party?
Some interesting bits.
Yeah, it didn't matter what party you were from. If you got the second most number of electoral votes, you were the vice president. So can you imagine a Trump-Biden or Biden-Trump administration, or in the last cycle, a Trump-Clinton or Clinton-Trump presidency?
Well, in today's environment, I can't. I think back in the day when this was the norm, I think you could see that more. And I think that at that time, it would have made both parties work together for the good of the American people. Which I
believe there were more parties back then to begin with. There were like 3 or 4 decent political parties instead of just 2 monstrous ones. And
yeah, so there were more parties, but at the same time, 2 parties or 6 parties, it doesn't matter. Either way, you still would have been forced to work with somebody that you wouldn't necessarily be working with on your own if given the choice. So my point is that it forced people to work together for the good of the American people, whereas today you don't have that. I don't honestly think, though, that today they could. I think that we have drifted so far in terms of, two camps, two tribal, mentalities, that I don't think that would be possible, quite honestly.
Yeah, I
because
mean,
nothing would get done.
look at Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi, the Senate Republican Senate Majority Leader, and the Democratic Speaker of the House, the two leaders of our legislative branch of government. They've been in a room, virtually in a room together for 3 weeks now, and can't come up with a second bill of COVID relief. Now, the forefathers, I think, were pretty ingenious when they came up with this concept in the Constitution, because, like you said, it forces compromise. It forces people of different political stripes. They have to work together. I mean, kind of like an arranged marriage, so to speak. And you have to, for the next 4 years, you guys got to learn to get along and to do what's best for the people. And you're there to check each other, because obviously, if you ran politically against each other, you're not thinking the same things.
Yeah.
On many issues. This makes you kind of grind out and fight out those things and come up with a solution that you both can live with. Maybe not both totally happy with, but you both can live with. And I don't know what year specifically, but that went away, and then it became a thing where the president or the party picked the ticket of president and vice president, and then it got to even where the party not so much picks the vice presidential person now, but the nominee does. Whether it's John McCain picking Sarah Palin, or Biden picking Kamala Harris, or Trump picking Pence, or Hillary picking Tim Kaine in Virginia. It's changed so much. But if you go back, and this is one thing I'm a big believer in personally, is maybe we should go back to the actual text of the Constitution and see where we've gone astray.
Are you advocating for a return to factory settings? Push that factory
Yeah,
settings
let's reboot this thing. Let's go back to the Constitution as it is written.
Nice.
Now I'm saying, certainly there are amendments and things I think we can keep. But I think as far as mechanisms, I think that if we had to take Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, or Joe Biden for that matter, and put them in a room together for 4 years and say, you have to figure this stuff out. You have to. They would.
Well, they would have to.
I mean, or we'll kick both of you out in 4 years. And you'll both be failures, no matter what tribe you belong to. But and I think that is a much more even-handed and probably productive for this nation way of doing things than we currently do right now, with the two tribes and the increasing polarization. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I heard Mitch McConnell today, and he was on the Senate floor, throwing darts at Democrat Chuck Schumer, who's a Democratic Senate Minority Leader, because Schumer's saying, well, the Republican plan doesn't do enough to help the people, and Nancy Pelosi saying, oh, it's making children starve. We have to have more money for the children. Well, they want to give billions of dollars to New Jersey, which I can speak to because I live there, and New Jersey has been in a budget hole for the last 16 to 20 years because of mismanagement. And from both parties, by the way.
Yep.
Both parties. Actually, you can blame it on primarily on Republican Governor Christine Todd Whitman, who was the first to borrow from the state's public employees pension fund to cover a budget shortfall. And that has just spiraled out of control for both Democrats, Corzine and McGreevey, and and Christie and
A cast of colorful characters all
yeah,
around.
and as a result, New Jersey financially is circling the drain. We're circling the bowl out there in New Jersey. I mean, now Murphy's saying,
I think by the end of it, we're going to be doing.
yeah, because I mean, before COVID, Murphy was talking about in his budget address like a $10 billion shortfall. As a matter of fact, that's what he's being sued about now, is because he's trying to see, in New Jersey, your budget must balance and it can't go negative. It can't go negative. You can't borrow money for next year's budget. You can't do it. Constitutionally, can't do it. What Murphy's doing is he wants to float governmental bonds. Basically, he wants to mortgage New Jersey for $10 billion to cover that budget shortfall. Well, COVID hits, and now all of a sudden it's like, well, the federal government should give us that money. Why? Are you just going to blow it again like you did the first time? You, Christie, Whitman, Corzine, McGreevy, et al., like you all did, Cody and DeFrancisco, when they did their short stints as governor from both parties. Are you just going to blow it like you did then? It's funny. We did an interview when I worked for the Princeton Packet a couple years back during the last gubernatorial cycle in New Jersey, and I believe State Senator, Majority Leader Steve Sweeney, and his name was being bantied around pretty good for to be governor. And he said, and I have video of this, so I can back it up, folks. By the way, he works as a union president for like a construction union, like a metal workers union. And that's his real job, his day job. And he said that the state has given too much to the public unions in terms of pension and everything else. And the demands of the public unions are what is causing much of the budget crisis in New Jersey. Steve Sweeney, the Democrat, who is the head of a union, said that. Yeah, I mean, and yeah. So, now the New Jersey, New York, Andrew Cuomo, governor, Democratic governor, Ned Lamont up in Connecticut, Democratic governor, and now they all want the second round of COVID assistance, basically to bail them out. Chicago, San Francisco, Nancy Pelosi's home district, which is now turned into literally a cesspool. People are going to the bathroom on the streets. There's reports that the Black Plague is being found in rats in San Francisco.
Yeah. I mean,
okay, Facebook, do not, and YouTube, this is not false or misleading information. Look it up. Go to your great oracle of Google. It's there.
Charlie, plague out west is not an unheard of phenomenon. I mean, there are cats out west that get plague every year. So, I mean, it's an unheard of phenomenon for us here on the East Coast, but out west, there are cases of plague every year. I mean, the numbers are probably skyrocketing in cesspools like San Francisco, because you have so many more, areas in which, vermin can thrive. But yeah, plague is out there for sure. I mean, you couldn't pay me enough to go to San Francisco or Portland or Seattle or any of those places that used to be gorgeous, beautiful places and now are just disgusting dumps. So yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, it's a disgusting mess over there.
Well, you have those cities, Chicago. They've all. I mean, what you just had. What city is it? Is it Seattle, where the police chief just resigned?
Yeah.
The African American woman. Her last name is Best. She resigned. I saw part of her press conference, and she said it just became. It wasn't about the money that they were looking to cut from her specifically, but the money that they were looking to cut from the command staff and these other officers that she had worked with in a career that lasted 30 years, over 30 years. And she just couldn't abide by it, and she resigned. And then Seattle's looking to defund the police and all this, and this is something you're probably going to see in places like Minneapolis and Chicago eventually. Although Chicago, they don't even know what they're doing now. You have Mayor Lightfoot in Chicago, who was raising the bridges a couple days ago because overnight people ran into the downtown and were smashing, looting, and rioting. No, there was no peaceful protest. This wasn't a George Floyd thing or anything like that. This was just straight up rioting and looting in downtown Chicago. So they had to pull up the famed bridges to get to the downtown, so people couldn't continue on there. And that was just a couple of days ago. And here she's another one that's defund the police. The problem. Yeah, the reason we have a lot of people breaking into businesses and stealing stuff is because of guns.
Because that argument has worked so well. I mean, you got some of the strictest gun control laws in the country in Chicago, and yet every year Chicago is up there in terms of gun violence. Every year, I mean, now it's even worse, but every year there's more and more kids, adults that are killed by guns every year, and it's just ridiculous. The argument makes no sense.
Well, I had when I was younger. I was given a .22 that belonged to my grandfather, a .22 rifle for hunting in upstate New York. Small game hunting, squirrels, rabbits, such. Yeah, I remember, since I had that gun, that just made me go into the next door town and break into a store and steal stuff. Yeah, I did that every weekend.
It's amazing what it does.
I'd look at that gun, and it would just tell me, "You must go out and loot, Charlie. Charlie, you must go out and loot. You must steal what you want. Get that new album you're looking for. It is there for the taking." Yeah, that really happened. Not.
I was going to say, you might have wanted to get some help for that schizophrenia, but...
Yeah. Well, apparently there's a lot more schizophrenics like me in Chicago, because the guns are making them run into the downtown at 3, 4 in the morning, smash a window, and grab stuff. That's a problem of the guns.
This whole defund the police thing it's really just going to lead to the creation of neighborhood militias, is really all it's going to do, because if you take away the mechanism that people are paying into with their taxes and are supporting for societal order, and peacefulness and being safe from crime, people are not going to stand idly by and just be slaughtered. Not in this country. Maybe in others where they've all been disarmed. But in this country, with the Second Amendment, I mean, this year alone, because of COVID and because of all this rioting, gun sales are through the roof. I mean, I don't think that this country's ever seen gun sales like they've seen, in the last 6 months. So it's just going to lead to the creation of neighborhood militias and neighborhood watches, and people are just going to start taking the law into their own hands. And if you come around and you start messing with people, it's going to be a bloodbath, because everybody's going to be armed. The entire country will be like Texas if you start defunding the police. I mean, you just can't leave people, with no way to defend themselves. They're going to do it. They're going to take it into their own hands, by whatever means necessary to protect them and their families. Well, and this is not going to end well for anyone.
One of the big things is, okay, you defund the police, and you have record number of officers in New York City who are looking to retire and get out.
Yeah, why would they want to do a job they're getting villainized for?
Yeah, so you have that. What do you do when you call 911 when somebody's breaking into your house? What are you going to do? You can get on the line and they're going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry. We can't respond to you right now because that's not, we don't have enough officers, or that's no longer our responsibility. Let me know when the bodies start piling up. We'll come and we'll take them out." You know what I mean?
That's what it's going to have to come down to, because that's what they're going to do. They're going to say, "We can't help you. Please call back later." And people are going to start arming themselves and taking care of themselves.
And you also have to remember that in the majority of the country, maybe in the urban bubbles of New York or whatever, yeah, police may be able to get there in 3, 5, 6 minutes. In many
No,
places,
not in some places.
in many places in this country, police are a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour away. Somebody's breaking into your house, you have to hold them off for an hour before law enforcement will get there and handle the situation. And if you don't have a way to hold them off, you're done. You're done. No matter how fast you dial 911 or how good your Sloman shield is, you're done.
Yeah, I mean, basically, when the cops get there, it's really just to, damage control and, all right, well, we just got to take the body away.
Literally mop up.
Yeah, basically. So, these people, these coastal elites don't understand that, yeah, I mean, in many places of this country, it is a very real concern, and defunding the police is going to lead to an enormous spike in violence, as you're seeing now in these crazy cities that are doing just that, but it's going to be the entire country.
Well, the crazy thing is covering local governments like I have and budgets and things. People, especially in Central Jersey, in the area you're in, they go to these meetings, these town council meetings, and the police that will come in with their budget and they'll say how many calls they went to, what the average time was to respond, and yada yada. These people are upset if the police respond in, let's say, 4 to 6 minutes. Well, why weren't you faster?
Can I fly?
It's not Star Trek. We don't have transporters. All right? But can you imagine if you live someplace where the police are 20 minutes to almost an hour away? Even if they're flying at 90 miles an hour, they may be 60 miles from your house.
Mm-hmm.
There are places in Montana, even Texas and such places where, yeah, the police are not just right around the corner at your beck and call.
Yep.
I mean, can you imagine these people having to live in those places? If they're upset with the cops getting there in 5 minutes, imagine what they'd be if the cops weren't getting there for 40 minutes.
Well, they'd be dead is what they'd be because they don't believe.
Well, aside from that, I mean, at the meetings, in the middle of Montana, showing up at a town council meeting and looking at them saying, I had to wait 20 minutes for the officers. They'd be looking at this person, they'd be laughing. It's like, yep, and you were real lucky we made it that fast.
Yeah. Yeah, basically. So, I mean, this whole thing is just not going to end well. It really, especially, you've got this atmosphere of, this apocalyptic atmosphere in terms of this election. You've got people already, freaking out and anxious, because of this whole, COVID situation. You've got, defunding this police movement. So it's not going to end well because, as people's anxieties mount and their protection mechanisms, fall, they're going to arm themselves. So you're going into an election that people view in apocalyptic terms with an incredibly anxious society that's on the edge from this illness, and is increasingly arming themselves because these crazy city councils are defunding the police. I don't see this ending well. I just don't.
Well, hopefully we're wrong, but I think that's where we have to leave
That's
this.
great.
That's where we'll have to leave it for this week. Hopefully we have a couple other shows that we have planned with some guests coming up. Hopefully they will come to fruition pretty soon. We want you to keep kind of keep your eye on us, keep your ear on us, and give us your feedback. Like we said, if you're watching on YouTube, please make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when we drop a new podcast. If you're listening, head over to Anchor FM, no matter what format, with Spotify, whatever you're listening to this podcast with, please head over to Anchor FM and support our work. Also, you can also reach us through, we have a Discord called The Grill Online. Join our Discord, and we can interact with you. We can talk to you. So those are some things to keep in mind. So I guess until next week, this is Charles W. Kim and Nicole M. Wells, and we will see you next week on What's Cooking with the Grill.